You don't know that I'm going to even do it. You don't know. I may do it. I may not do it. I mean, nobody knows what I'm going to do. I can tell you this, that to be talking, we may meet. I don't know. There's a big difference between now and a week ago, right? Big difference. Well, I don't know how much longer it's going to go on. I mean, they're totally defenseless. They have no air defense whatsoever. We've totally captured, we've totally captured the air, Brian. Two very simple words, a very simple, unconditional surrender. That means I've had it. Okay, I've had it, I give up, no more. Then we go blow up all the, all the nuclear stuff that's all over the place there. No, they had bad intentions. For 40 years they've been saying death to America, death to Israel, death to anybody else that they didn't like.
And that's good enough for out there. That is President Trump just moments ago talking this morning about the Iran situation. And really, we have Colonel Doug Macgregor on, defense and foreign policy analyst, former advisor to the Secretary of Defense in the first Trump administration, highly decorated combat veteran. Doug, listening to him speak there, it sounds like that Trump, I don't know who's advising him or who's informing him, but it sounds like he thinks that Iran is finished already and they're just a shell of a country and we can basically do whatever we want. So now he's asked for unconditional, like Battleship Missouri type surrender from Iran. Where do you think this is going? What do you think of his comments?
Well, arrogance and self-delusion have a bad habit of trumping reason. And I think that's what you just listened to. I think his description of reality is completely remote from what's actually happening on the ground and in the air. With each passing hour, each passing day, Iran, with over 90 million people in a geographic region almost the size of Western Europe, grows stronger. And with each passing day and each passing hour, Israel grows far, far weaker. Israel is, comparatively speaking, a postage stamp, and it's being pulverized. Being subjected to enormous numbers of warheads from missiles that it simply can't stop. So now all of a sudden to turn around and suggest that Iran's only viable way forward is to capitulate unconditionally to whatever Washington and Israel, which are almost the same, frankly want, is absurd. It's not going to happen.
And that's certainly the answer from the Iranian side, as we had the Ayatollah, who came out very defiantly on his own just also earlier today and said this.
The conflict between Israel and Iran intensifies. The Iranian nation will stand firm against an imposed war, just as it will stand firm against an imposed peace. And this nation will not surrender to anyone in the face of imposition. The Americans should know that any U.S. military intervention will undoubtedly cause irreparable damage.
Now, there's a claim in many of these Western press, many of the so-called experts I've seen, former generals, other diplomats, they've come on in the U.S. and said, that's just a bunch of bluster. In fact, they're already almost out of missiles. They can't even, in fact, it's been going down, and pretty soon they're going to run out altogether. They're defenseless, which is maybe why President Trump said that in that comment we just showed there. Is that accurate? What's your assessment?
Well, look, the same people who are making these arguments right now about Iran are indistinguishable from the people that made the arguments about Russia's weakness. Russia was running out of ammunition. Russia was running out of tanks. Russia was running out of missiles. Russia was weak. It was incompetent. It was corrupt. Russia could do nothing except bow to our wishes and ultimately surrender to Ukraine. In fact, these same delusional fellows that are now looking at graveyards all over Ukraine that are filled to capacity are still insisting that with a little bit more time and a few more weapons, Ukraine can still prevail. How many times do you have to listen to these same voices that are full of poisonous lies and take them seriously? Americans aren't paying any attention. Let's face it right up front. Our three branches of government consist of one, basically Congress and the White House as one branch, the so-called military-industrial complex, which for the sake of discussion consists of active and retired flag officers, primarily 4 stars, and then the mainstream media. Those are the three branches of government. All three branches are saying the same things now about Iran that were said about Ukraine. They're not really discussing Ukraine very much because they have nowhere to go. We've already lost our position in Ukraine. So now the decision is to shift focus and shift the distribution of resources to Israel on the assumption that, well, we're in a new ball game here and we can win it. And that's the way these people look at it. Well, to some extent, it is a game for the three branches of government that I just described. Truth doesn't matter. You can spend as much as you want. You can use whatever you want, because in their minds, Iran cannot possibly win. Israel is going to inevitably be victorious. Well, that's not true. And right now, the rest of the world is rallying to Iran. Israel is running out of everything. Air defense missiles, strike missiles, whatever, you name it. Their skies are not their own. Their skies are full of Iranian missiles and attack drones. They are losing this war. They started a war without understanding what they were doing, which is incidentally exactly what Ben Gvir was quoted as saying. You know, why are you trying to bring in the United States? Well, we didn't understand the power of the Iran's missile arsenal. Effectively, that's what he said. He's right. Only he admitted it by accident in public. Well, the word is out everywhere, but in the United States, and the same three branches of government, the military, the Congress, and then ultimately the mainstream media, are pumping out lies, saying that this is over. And unfortunately, Donald Trump, who has no depth of understanding whatsoever in these areas, certainly no strategic understanding, is inclined to believe what he hears. He doesn't know. So if the same group of four stars that told us, 3-4 years ago, Russia was doomed, Ukraine would win, Ukraine is winning, are all telling him now, Israel is going to dominate everything, Israel is going to win, we can go in and deliver the coup de grace. In other words, we can go in and one big massive strike, we can turn this whole thing around and Iran will surrender. And he's believing it.
Well, and in fact, here's a great example that I could show you the comment from Lindsey Graham yesterday where he's saying, listen, it's regime change on. Let's go in and knock them out and be done with this once and for all. And then Jack Keane talked about the mechanics of how to do it.
In my judgment, assist the Israelis in their air campaign by conducting a limited but focused air campaign on using penetration bombing to eliminate the end of that nuclear end state. And that will be a major strategic achievement. That takes off the table. Think of what it does. Takes off the table the thought of a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. It reduces Iran's as a major power broker in the region. Yeah. And for the congressman to say that we've never been at war with Iran, formally, yeah, but they killed 241 Marines in the 80s. They blew up 2 of our embassies in Lebanon and Kuwait and killed hundreds more. They killed scores of our Air Force personnel in the barracks in Saudi Arabia in the 90s. And it's a documented fact that they developed advanced IEDs to focus on U.S. soldiers in the war in Iraq.
He just goes through this whole litany of alleged offenses by Iran against us, like, why haven't we killed them earlier? But anyway, let's go get them right now. But let's start at the first part of what he said there about this limited, targeted airstrikes, and bam, problem's going to be over. Militarily, is he right?
No, Iran is at war. This is not limited anymore in any way. Iran is going to do everything in its power to win this war. For Iran, winning the war means destroying Israel. It has to, because if it doesn't, Israel will continue to make every effort to destroy Iran. So the Iranians have to utterly and completely devastate and flatten Israel. So this is a war. This is not a limited anything. He needs to dump that word limited. And if we enter it, we too will become the target for Iran. And Iran military power will be used against us in whatever way possible.
And if anybody's in any doubt about that, that was also removed earlier today when the Iranian ambassador added this.
Remarks made by Donald Trump are completely unwarranted, are very hostile. We cannot ignore them. We are vigilant about what Donald Trump is saying. We will put it in our calculations, in our assessments, and there is a line which, if crossed, there should be a response on our side. And that line will be defined by our relevant authorities, including military forces. And once the red line is crossed, the response will come.
The response will come. Now, I've heard from a couple of different sources just within the last hour that apparently a decision has been made in the White House and that strikes could be coming from the United States offensively against Iran, possibly even by this afternoon. In the event that that happens, do you think that that's just bluster? Will Iran actually take American forces under fire?
I think the Iranians will target everything that they can reach with their missile arsenal. Beyond that, with their drones. Will they be able to harm us here at home? I suspect so. But remember that the first damage that Americans will feel, and this is critical, because in all of the previous operations that we've conducted since 1990, there was no real sense of pain here at home. But the Americans will feel the economic impact. And that's going to come as a result of the disruption of the oil flow and other things, along with natural gas and the markets. And we're already very fragile financially. We've been printing money as though it doesn't matter, and it's about to catch up with us in a dramatic way. Our treasury market is going to implode. We can't sell any more debt anyhow. So the bottom line is we're going to feel the pain at home this time around in ways that we never felt before. That's going to sour the American people pretty quickly on everything that everyone is discussing in Washington.
Well, and probably the first target to that, I fear, could be our troops. I've mentioned several times that, all these far-flung bases, especially in Iraq and in Syria, many of them have barely even any tactical air defense, but certainly they don't have any strategic air defenses like the Iron Dome, the Patriot system, THAAD, et cetera, which we see graphically shown. Even that is very, very porous. Apparently, it's getting less than 10% in reality of the incoming ballistic missiles that Iran has been firing. And all of these bases here will be wide open. There was a specific danger, though, that I think not many people are aware of. It's not just hitting our bases, but as military summary showed this morning, there is a bigger threat to our Navy.
First of all, about the Middle East and about the possible trap. During the previous days, the United States of America were focused in deploying additional forces and troops in this area. U.S. builds up strike group of Iran, aircraft carriers, tankers, and alarm signals. Washington has sharply increased its military presence in the region amid the escalating conflict between Israel and Iran. Yeah. So, of course, we see that obviously this is a part of Iranian plan to block completely the Persian Gulf. Of course, the main purpose of this blockade is not just to probably stop the international trade or something like this. The most important probably goal and task of the Iranians is the American bases in this area. According to information we have, the United States of America have lots of bases on the territory of Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and the most important, the United States of America has their Navy base on the territory of the state by the name of Bahrain. And currently there are ships, military ships of the United States of America. And obviously we understand if something happens between the United States of America and the Iranians, obviously the United States of America will have no chances for evacuation their fleet from the area of Bahrain through this Persian Gulf and then further in the direction of the Gulf of Oman and further in the direction of the Indian Sea, because obviously the fleet of the United States of America would be immediately destroyed by missile strikes carried out by the Iranians.
Do you think that Iran would actually target our fleet at Bahrain?
Yes, without hesitation. And I think President Trump knows that. But I think President Trump is betting very heavily on the promises that are being made to him by the Air Force and the Navy and Special Ops. What are those promises? Very simply, if we drop these giant bunker busters on the Iranian nuclear facility, we can destroy or disrupt that. but we can also decapitate the regime. We can drop these giant bombs on Tehran and kill lots of people at the top. This, of course, is nonsense. We should have learned this by now. I mean, as I tried to explain to several people before the Second World War really got underway with Stalin in 1941, the Germans were convinced that the Soviets had killed 35,000 of their best officers, and therefore the Soviet armed forces could not operate effectively and certainly couldn't recover from the reverses that were inflicted on it in 1941. That all turned out to be fundamentally wrong. When you start killing people at the top, you got to keep in mind that there are lots of other energetic, intelligent, ambitious people below them ready to step in. And they may turn out to be much better than the originals that you killed. Well, I think we're going to find that is true very much in Iran. The whole thing is nonsensical. We're betting that air and naval power will deliver victory. It never has. It can facilitate success, but it's not going to fundamentally change the equation on the ground. And you're not talking about little Iraq, which frankly, compared with Iran, is quite small. And we never did have to operate in the mountains for any length of time in the north. This is not Iraq. It's not the National Training Center that you and I know, which is a postage stamp. So you're dealing with a great power. Now, here's the other part of it. The world is rallying to Iran, not to us. We are hated and despised for supporting the genocidal regime in Israel. Well, Americans don't know that. They don't particularly care. But again, the mainstream media and the government itself, along with the senior ranks of the military, they're all in the pockets of the Israel lobby. So they're going to preach war, war, war. And they also think we can strike with impunity. They think we can blow things up and nothing will happen to us. We're about to get an education. We have 40,000 men in these places, at least, probably more, not including contractors. We're going to get a lot of people killed. And then as far as capital ships go, today they can be tracked by satellite. It's not as though you can hide aircraft carriers anymore in the depths of the ocean. They can be found. They can be targeted. I'm sure the admirals in command of the surface fleet have been told, whatever you do, don't lose a capital ship. Don't lose a carrier. It's sort of like Winston Churchill saying to his admirals, whatever you do, don't lose the Prince of Wales. You know, once the hood was blown up by the Germans, the Prince of Wales beat a hasty retreat. Don't lose the Prince of Wales. Well, guess what? We're being told the same kinds of things. This is a very fragile operation. You start taking heavy losses. You start suffering economic crises on a massive scale. You watch $7 a gallon gas show up. Things in the United States will change rapidly. The frustration for me, and I think for you and many of us, is what is wrong with President Trump, who is listening to these poisonous people who have destroyed us in Ukraine, who destroyed us ultimately in the Middle East, destroyed us in Iraq. There was never any reason to occupy Iraq. We could have been out of Iraq in 90 days, 120 days, and been done with it and successful. But these poisonous voices kept us there. We're transforming Iraq. The only thing we did was transform the Middle East into a boiling cauldron of misfortune, despair, poverty, and death. We've got to stop. But President Trump doesn't seem to understand that. So he listens to these people. They're catastrophic.
And I wonder, I'd like to drill in a little bit more on the military aspects of this and try to, I guess, help educate people about what is and isn't possible here and what the threats are that maybe we haven't faced before. When we went into, and we'll just pick the 2003 Iraq War, where Operation so-called Iraqi Freedom that Bush launched with the lie about the weapons of mass destruction and all of that. We went in there on the ground, and Iraq had already been under sanctions for 10 years after the Desert Storm, where we had decimated a lot of his military power. So he was very weak, et cetera, and had virtually no chance. Had some old scuds, and not even many of those did literally nothing to it. What is the difference between where Iraq was then and where Iran is now, if anyone thinks about doing anything, especially on the ground?
Well, the precision revolution has struck. In other words, Iran has access to the best precise missile technology you're going to find anywhere in the world. They have a virtually inexhaustible inventory of precision munitions, precision missiles, precision rockets. That didn't exist in 1990. But keep something else in mind. We were very fortunate in 1991, and very few people ever point this out. But Saddam Hussein always had the capability to launch roughly 30 to 40, maybe even 50 Scuds at once. And he could have launched all of them at one specific target, a place called Al Jabail, the port.
Remember that, yeah.
On the Persian Gulf that most of us came through.
Right.
If he had done that, that would have fundamentally changed the strategic calculus. How many people would he have killed? How much damage would he have done? In fact, we had one Scud warhead land within perhaps 500 meters of a Marine amphibious carrier full of Marines. Now, just imagine what would have happened if that thing had gotten closer and struck. In other words, we were lucky. And what did we learn from all of that? Nothing. We have a problem. We just don't learn. And right now, we continue to forget that every time Iran fires a missile at Israel, the Israeli air defenses have to launch somewhere in the neighborhood of between 2 or even 3 missiles against the incoming missile. Well, it doesn't take a genius in mathematics to figure out that you're going to run out of missiles very, very quickly. They already are. We're shipping what we can in, but we're not running missile production in Lockheed Martin or Raytheon 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah, and by the way, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that very fact this morning, that they're running low on interceptor missiles right now.
Yeah, and this is a losing proposition. Israel started a war. It had no chance of winning and is losing. Ergo, it has to go to President Trump and say, save us, come in and save us. And so Donald Trump is listening to all of the usual suspects on the Hill, in the Pentagon, retired and active, or in the mainstream media and say, oh, the Iranians are weak. They can't hold out. We can pulverize them. We can beat them into submission. We can drop these 30,000-pound bombs and they'll have no choice. It's not going to happen. It won't work. It didn't work during the Second War before we had precision, and we still dropped tonnage on top of easy, soft targets like Dresden or Hamburg or Berlin. Didn't make any difference. In fact, we know that in both Japan as well as in Germany, the population coalesced around its government and defended it. You get the opposite outcome of what you want.
You know, Doug, I want to get your assessment on something. You talk about why is Trump listening to these people. What was reported in the New York Times about 2 months ago is that in early March, when Trump said that either Iran does what we tell them or bombs will be falling and all this kind of stuff. And then all of a sudden he changed pretty dramatically track and started saying, well, actually, let's have a negotiated settlement. I think we can make something work out here. It was reported that the reason was because Tulsi Gabbard was, among many other, apparently a handful of others, were able to convince Trump of the cost and the dangers of trying to go to war with Iran. And then all of a sudden, just about 3 or 4 days ago, apparently Tulsi Gabbard was still giving the same advice. We know for sure in March, after that conversation, that she said that the Ayatollah has not given the instructions for a bomb. They have not started one according to the intelligence community, et cetera. But then Netanyahu came in and said, our intelligence says that they are. And so Trump just says, yeah, I don't care what Tulsi said, just straight up said that. And then now it seems like he has just deferred to whatever Benjamin Netanyahu says at the expense of even those on his own staff who are telling the right information. What does that tell you, and how worried should we be about that?
Tulsi Gabbard is not beholden to people that provided hundreds of millions of dollars for her campaign. I mean, let's be frank. President Trump would not be in the White House today if it were not for wealthy Jewish billionaires allied with their friend Netanyahu, who put Trump into office. And Trump had to promise certain things if he were elected, one of which was that he's going to take on and destroy Iran. I'm sure that was made very clear to him. Anybody who knows anything about Sheldon and Miriam Adelson knows that in fact, is what they want. They're not the Lone Rangers. All the top Jewish money oligarchs are all interested in the same thing because they flourish financially in London and New York City if, in fact, Israel is successful and victorious. because they're interested not simply in Israel's local hegemony in the Middle East, they want global financial hegemony. The United States is simply a tool in their toolbox to get them there. So Tulsi has none of that. Tulsi is irrelevant. Tulsi is there because Tulsi supported Trump to get elected, but Tulsi is also an articulate and intelligent woman. It's nice to have one of those in the cabinet, by the way. And she is a person of character that all of us respect. I'm not surprised at all at anything that Tulsi has said because Tulsi tells the truth, and I pay great tribute to her. I don't know how much longer she's going to be able to stay in the cabinet under these circumstances, but the truth really doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter because the military branch of the three branches that we've discussed continues to tell President Trump that we can dominate them. We can dominate Iran from the air. We can dominate Iran from the sea. The Iranians will have no choice but to show up and sign the unconditional surrender. And I think President Trump likes the image of President Trump showing up somewhere like the battleship Missouri and watching the Iranian mullahs crawl to him and sign this unconditional surrender. The problem is it's a fantasy. It's
and Doug, we just before this show here, and I recommend everybody go back to our channel and click on and watch this. We had Ted Postal on, graphically showed that the Iron Dome system, the whole integrated air defense system, is like a sieve, and Iranian missiles can go right through it. Then he showed that this GBU-57 bunker buster that we have, this 30,000-pound bomb, because of how, well, number one, because of the limitations of the bomb itself, but secondly, because of the defensive way that Iran is alleged to have built its bunkers underneath there, especially at Fordo, is that there's almost no chance this thing could even get close to destroying this thing. So if we think like Jack Keane that this is going to, knock that out and that it's going to be game over, or that our troops are defended, which Trump said yesterday, he said with confidence, oh yeah, our troops have all the defense they need, which implies that exactly what you just said, somebody is in his ear who's a military expert telling him that our air defenses work and that the bunker buster bomb will solve the problem, but it won't. So the question is going to be, if these people who are telling him this, they know those things, yet why would they tell him something that can't succeed?
Well, why did Biden gradually allow himself and his administration to be dragged into a war with Russia in Ukraine that could never possibly be won?
Right. Fair point.
The same people were involved in that particular scenario. I mean, we could take it back February, March, April, May, June. Russia's losing. Russia's a disaster. Russia can do nothing. It's the same bunch. Now, did they profit from this? Oh, yes. All you have to do is check the bank accounts of the retired military types, along with the key figures on the Hill, in the Senate, in the House. Then look at industry. Industry certainly pocketed billions as a result of that disastrous war. And finally, the mainstream media continues to pump out the lies, and they continue to have viewership. Now, they don't have as many views as they used to. The good news is that legacy media is on the downswing. It's declining. People are looking elsewhere for the truth. But Dan, if you go to people that are in my age, I'm a boomer. And if you look at the so-called boomers, oh, yeah, I listened to so-and-so on Fox or CNN, and they said this, and I know that they're right. Well, you're stupid because they're not right, and they're lying to you. Just as they lied to you about Russia, they're lying to you about Iran. But this is a much more dangerous scenario. The Israelis have nuclear weapons, and as they become more and more desperate, they are inclined to turn to the use of a nuclear weapon to rescue them, to rescue themselves from certain defeat. And the problem is that Iran is not alone. Not only will China and Russia come to Iran's aid, they've already provided a great deal of assistance, and they're providing more as we speak. It's also the entire Muslim world. Even someone like Erdogan, who I like to characterize as an opportunistic vulture that sits by the side of the road and waits to see the roadkill, then decides whether or not he wants to fly in and devour the roadkill. Erdogan is sitting on the side watching what's happening. And if he thinks it's in his interest to do so, he'll sweep into Israel and march into Jerusalem and declare victory, telling the Muslim world that he did it all. I mean, it's not impossible, and it's the kind of thing that I think he would eagerly do if he thought he could get away with it. But right now, he's going to sit on the sidelines. He's going to continue to play nice with the Israelis, providing them with some food and oil from time to time. And at the same time, he's going to say, Iran is right. Iran has got a legitimate beef. Iran deserves to be supported. But he's not going to do anything until he sees his opportunity. But with the exception of Erdogan, if you look at everyone else from Morocco to India, they've pretty much sided with Iran. And that siding is going to become infinitely more important. Egypt has a very large force. That large force is now sitting closer to Israel than it ever has in the history of the region. It's only a matter of time until the Egyptians intervene. The Israelis know that. They're worried about it. But there's not a great deal they can do about it unless they want to risk a wider regional war with everyone, because the Russians and the Chinese have made it abundantly clear they will not tolerate the destruction of Egypt. I mean, that's fact.
Let's go down that path for a little bit more here, because that's really the ramifications if things go sideways that almost nobody's talking about, certainly not in the mainstream here, and that is what could happen if Israel starts to get panicky. Now, you mentioned a minute ago that China is helping. There are reports in even Western media today that 4 747 style aircraft have come from China in the last 48 hours and offloaded something. We don't know for sure what, but something has come in and gone. We don't know how much more of that. I haven't seen any reports about whether Russia has been sending jets as well, but we can assume that Iran is not basically just running out of everything and there's nobody to help them out. In the event that the United States does indeed enter this war, the bunker busters don't work, Iran could race to a bomb potentially. That's one bad outcome. But then if they start attacking our ships in the Gulf, like we showed there a second ago, or our bases in Iraq and Syria, et cetera, and we start having casualties, now there's going to be clamoring from that same class you mentioned for us to just get full on in the war. But if even that doesn't work and Israel starts to lose, what is the risk of them using their nuclear weapons?
I think it's quite real. And you know this man, his name is Finkelstein. He's spoken publicly about Israel. He's been a great critic for many years. And he has referred to them as a lunatic state. I never subscribed to that view. But the more I look at the decision-making that's gone on in Israel to this point, the more I'm inclined to agree. And I'm afraid that this man Netanyahu and his friends would turn to the use of a nuclear weapon, even if they used it in a way that's designed to bully us. In other words, if you don't do X, Y, and Z for us, we'll use a nuke. I mean, I think that's a possibility. In other words, we in Israel are about to go under, and you haven't done enough. If you don't do more, we will use a nuclear weapon. What they need to understand, and what we need to understand, is if a nuclear detonation results from Israel's use of a nuclear weapon, then a nuclear weapon will inevitably be used against Israel. That's the problem. There are just too many nuclear capable powers out there that will come in and assist Iran in the event that the Israelis use a nuclear weapon. And the worst part is that what we don't want is a president in the White House or people in Congress who are willing to put the United States of America, its 340 million citizens, its entire infrastructure, at risk of a nuclear exchange with another nuclear armed power over Israel. That's wrong.
And that is really the unthinkable. It is, no one is thinking it because no one's contemplating it. And, part of the reason is because you kind of alluded to this earlier in this episode, where our mentality is we never lose, even though that you can demonstrably say we have. But in terms of battles or attacks or something, we, even throughout 20 years of strategic failure in Afghanistan, we never lost a tactical fight against the Taliban, et cetera. And that's the only thing that people think about. I think, Doug, if you go back, maybe the last time we suffered a real, at least operational level failure and loss may have been in the Korean War, when we got pushed back from the Yalu River all the way back past Seoul, et cetera. What would that do to the American psyche? You've mentioned the economic issues, but what about the American psyche if all of a sudden all of these, we start losing aircraft carriers or major ships in the sea, that our aircraft get shot down, that our soldiers get blown up, and we can't stop it. What will that do to our psyche?
I think the support for the president and Congress would collapse almost instantly. We are not, it's interesting. I was watching this short clip from Tucker Carlson's interview with Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas. And he asked him, questions about Iran. And of course, Cruz knew nothing about Iran and could care less. He's just taking in all the money that the Israel lobby offers him. And that's all he cares about, because he's hopeful that he can finish out his term. He also wanted to be president. I think he may have given up on that one. Certainly after this interview, he should. But the bottom line is that there's no sense of anything mattering. In other words, we're so powerful. We have so much military power at our disposal. No one can stand against us. Well, you've cited some problems with that. First of all, yes, we were very nearly driven into the sea in 1950 by the attacking North Koreans. And we were rescued almost miraculously by MacArthur's strategy that landed us at Incheon. Then subsequently, we ended up in a war with the Chinese that neither we nor the Chinese wanted, but it was engineered by Stalin. That worked out because Eisenhower had the good sense to come to terms. And it was not a victory for us, but it also was not a catastrophic defeat. He understood the criticality of ending that war because there was no support in the United States for war against the Chinese in Manchuria, which is exactly what the maniacs at the time at the top of the Defense Department were pushing. It was ridiculous. Now, fast forward to Vietnam. No, we were strategically defeated there. And anybody who's seen the film clips of Americans on top of the U.S. Embassy clinging to helicopters trying to get out to sea knows we were defeated. That was a strategic catastrophe for us. And after that happened, because I remember this very clearly when I was a cadet at West Point, people made it very clear, well, that was a terribly stupid thing we did there. It made no sense. We never knew what we were doing. We had no attainable political military objective. We must never do that again. And that worked. It worked reasonably well. Well, we had some minor actions in Panama with this thing we call Just Because. It was not a very impressive operation. And Grenada, of course, which was another Chinese fire drill, as it was termed at the time in the building. But we ended up with this perfect enemy in 1990, frankly, who instead of taking action against us early, and it could have been done with terrible consequences for us, managed to behave like a patsy until it was almost too late.
And I wonder if I just kind of take it aside from there, because I know you said this before, but hardly anyone is aware of it. When George Bush first sent, I think it was 101st and 82nd to man these lines up on the front, you argued that we were really vulnerable at that time. What could have happened?
Well, at that point, the 101st and the 82nd both admitted, along with the Marines, there wasn't a great deal they could do if Saddam Hussein massed his tanks, his armor, and then continued to drive into Saudi Arabia and head south to the oil fields. There wasn't a great deal we could do. In fact, that's when I think Shinseki, who became chief of staff much later, described the 82nd and the 101st as essentially road bumps. What good is it? That's where we got this striker thing. Not that changed the equation much, but it's sunk in. People figured it out. The problem was that we didn't learn the essential lesson. We came out of Desert Storm, and everyone became convinced at that point we were invincible, invulnerable, invisible. In other words, we could do anything. It simply wasn't true. It's never true. No power is ever in that particular condition. But since it happened quickly and it seemed to cost very little in terms of human life, and the American people were delighted, people decided, well, now we can do anything else we want. Then we go through this long period of interventions. We were in the Kosovo air war, and the Serbs were brilliant at how they essentially obstructed us to the point where we never reduced Serbian air defenses below 83% effectiveness. Never, despite all of the air power that we employed against them. And we also lost a lot of costly munitions attacking decoys, which we've now seen happen in Iran as well. Decoys are always with us. They've always been with us. The Germans were pretty good at it. The Serbs were brilliant at it. It turns out the Iranians have been very successful with it. We're seeing the same things occur. We haven't learned something. You can't rely on one particular leg of a table to hold up the table. And we rely far too heavily on air and missile power. We can't win wars with air and missile power alone. We're not going to compel anybody to surrender over that. Somebody needs to get that message to President Trump. Now, I don't think it'll make much difference because President Trump has an ego, and once he's committed to something, he's extremely reluctant to back off and say, on second thought, I've given it some additional consideration. We need to take a different approach. That's not something he does. He doubles down. We've seen that with the tariffs. We've seen that with so many dumb things that have done terrible damage to us. I think that's what we're going to see happen with Iran. It's sad. And one of the reasons I wrote the article that was published initially on X and then came out on Zero Hedge was to put forward an alternative to get us out of the mess. And I've gotten a lot of interesting emails from people saying, this is really a great plan. This is something we ought to do. And so then we don't have a war. They don't get it. The three branches of government want a war. They want a war. It's
we have that up on the screen here.
And the military.
And I do want to put that up here because I was one of those who just was really cheering about this, because this the second I saw this, and I'd like you to go through your 5 points here. This is nearly categorically the same thing that you told Trump that he could have done to get the Russia-Ukraine war off the table right away. I mean, within the first month of being in office, he could have done, you told him, in the war, in support for Ukraine, withdraw our troops, tell them that you guys got this, all those things that you've said, we've mentioned many times here. Now here you have a 5-point plan with what we could do right now before we get sucked into a war. And I wonder if you could run through what those main points are.
Well, the points are very straightforward. First, you ask for an emergency UN Security Council meeting. You ask for an immediate ceasefire, making it clear that Washington opposes the destruction of Iran, Israel, and any other state in the Middle East. Well, of course, that's unacceptable. We don't oppose the destruction of anybody in the region that Israel doesn't like. But that's number one. And of course, no one in the Trump administration, no one in Washington wants to go to the United Nations for any reason. They all loathe, hate, and despise it. The second point is demand that Israel stop the killing of Palestinians in Gaza and withdraw its forces from Gaza and the West Bank. Well, people don't seem to understand that the catalyzing influence for Muslim solidarity and for billions of people to rally to Iran and stand beside Iran along with Russia and China and India and everybody else is effectively this genocidal war in Gaza. We need to get out of it and we need to stop it. Well, that means you're contradicting your masters, and your masters that elected you and funded you are not going to let you do that. And then, of course, there was some discussion about suspending all military aid to Israel until they agree to get the troops out of Gaza and permit humanitarian assistance to go in. But finally, and this is very, very important, you got to have the commitment of armed forces from non-aligned nations to go into Gaza, not the United States, nobody in Western Europe. It's got to be from non-aligned nations. And then ultimately, you need a great power conference. And what's a great power conference look like today? Well, it looks like the United States and Russia and China and India and Brazil. People say, well, why do we want them? Well, it's because they are great powers. They have enormous economic, political, and ultimately military influence. We want to get along with them. And we're looking for a solution that they can support. In other words, you can't impose, which is what President Trump wants to do, a solution anymore exclusively with American military power. In fact, we haven't managed to do that anywhere. As you just pointed out, Dan, we haven't succeeded in doing that anywhere since 1950, certainly not after 1965. So why are we trying to do it? We don't want to admit anyone else to the great power club except ourselves. We want permanent hegemony. Israel is part of that hegemony. It's a catastrophe for the American people. It's a disaster for the world. And unfortunately, Donald Trump seems to strongly support it.
And one of the reasons I'm so glad we have you on today, and especially when we do now, because at least as of this time we're airing this video, the time we're making it, we have not gotten involved in the war. We have not irreparably crossed that line from which we can't come back from, and engaged ourselves in the war and all the potential consequences that could fall from that. If the White House were watching this show right now and saw those or read it in the other things that you published on Zero Hedge and on X, that can keep us not only out of the war, that can extricate us from all of this stuff right now. That is still possible as we speak here. But if we continue to go down the line, and I say we, that means Donald Trump, if he continues to ignore combat realities and geopolitical realities and plunges us into this, it's not going to end well. And then this option that you have on the screen will no longer be available.
Well, I think, and again, President Trump and his advisors are betting heavily that if the Iranians attack our bases in the region, and let us say that thousands of Americans are wounded and say 1,000 or more are killed, that this will fill Americans with anger, and that will then allow them to, quote unquote, use everything at their disposal to destroy Iran. Now, I'm not convinced that will happen, because I think it could also be accompanied by the economic downturn that we discussed earlier, the financial implosion. I think Americans are much more likely to react the way they did when the Marines were killed in 1982. And they'll say, what were we doing there? Who put us there? This was a very dumb idea. And remember that after those Marines were killed, Ronald Reagan immediately held a press conference and said, we are going to find the people responsible. We're going to hunt them down, and this will not go on. What happened? That did not happen. Now, let's talk about the rest of the story very quickly so your audience understands the way these things work. I had the opportunity to sit down with Cap Weinberger for 2.5 hours. He saw my book, Breaking the Phalanx, liked it, wanted to talk about it. I came to Washington, met with him. And it was a very interesting conversation because he told me that Ronald Reagan had made an agreement with George Shultz to put Marines into Lebanon. And he had done so without even discussing it with Cap Weinberger. And Weinberger told me I found out about it while I was watching the news on television. And I said, well, sir, what did you do? He said, I immediately asked to see the president. And of course, the secretary over there knew me and said, absolutely, Mr. Weinberger, come over. The president will always see you whenever you like. So he walked in there and he said, sir, what did you do? Mr. President, what have you done? And he said, well, what do you mean, Cap? He said, you're promised to put Marines into Lebanon. He said, oh, yeah, George Shultz came here and made a good case that, this would contribute to stability and peace in Lebanon, and we ought to be on the right side of this. And I talked to him for almost 3 hours. I finally relented. I said, okay, George, we'll do that. And Cap Weinberger said, that's not going to happen. They won't contribute to anything but the chaos. We're going to be used like a puppet by the Israelis. We're going to be attacked by everybody. We shouldn't do this. And President Reagan said, well, I'm sorry, Cap, but I already announced that I would do this. I put my name to it. I'm sorry. So the next time that Cap Weinberger got a call, it was from President Reagan after the Marine barracks was destroyed and 240 plus Marines were killed. And the secretary said, Mr. Weinberger, the president would like to see you immediately. So Weinberger went over to see him. This time, he said, the door opened and Reagan came to him and grasped his hand and said, Cap, you were right. I was wrong. Now we need to get our men out of there immediately. Now, what happened? There was no major campaign to hunt anybody down because he knew that we had made a terrible mistake. We fell into the trap, the usual Israeli trap, which is to drag us into the Middle East, make us targets. Well, the point was that Ronald Reagan was smart enough to recognize we didn't need to be targets and got us out.
Well, and obviously that leads to the question, will the current president recognize what happens, what needs to happen in that event, and does the same thing about getting us out? I fear that he'll only try to double down no matter what the economy does, no matter how many more people die. I don't think that he knows how to handle a crisis, Doug. I mean, what do you think?
Well, I can't say there's a great deal of evidence that he does, but I'm hopeful, ever hopeful that at some point he will wise up. But I'm not sure that will happen, and so I fear, the worst possibility, which is that the Israelis continue to be beaten into the dust. The Israelis threaten to use a nuclear weapon, and they may even do it. And the consequences of that action are too terrible to contemplate, because that will not simply be the end of Israel. It will involve us, and it will involve others in the region. And I think the ultimate outcome is that we will be, whether we like it or not, driven out of the region. And that's the thing that the neocons continue to insist, we will not be driven out of the Middle East. Good Lord. What in the hell do you think will happen if a nuclear weapon is detonated in that region as a consequence of what I just outlined? This is very stupid thinking right now. And President Trump should say no. But I don't see much evidence that he will. I agree with you. I think that's the problem.
And based on that opening scene that we played from where the president was talking just before all this, you see somebody who's very, very confident that he's got all the upper hand here and that he can do whatever he wants. And I think you're right. I think he's looking for this USS Missouri top signing ceremony where some mullah is going to come and sign this instrument of surrender. And I think he really believes that. So I think he will be really, really shocked if what you have laid out happens instead. And
arrogance and self-delusion are trumping reason. That's
and there fortunately are, and I do want to end with this. There is one positive that Bernie Sanders, at least in the government, he's been pretty much consistent with this from the beginning. But here's the message he's given right now.
Now we face a dangerous and escalating war in Iran, which was begun in violation of international law by the extremist Netanyahu government. And the main point that I want to make today is that it is absolutely imperative that the United States not be dragged into this war. Let me say a word about how this war began. On Thursday, Netanyahu launched an illegal and unilateral surprise attack on Iran, bombing targets across the country and killing hundreds of people. Iran has responded with attacks of its own, which have killed dozens of people in Israel. Whatever you may think of the corrupt and authoritarian Iranian regime, Israel's attack clearly violated international law and the United Nations Charter. While every country has the right to defend itself, they do not have the right to launch so-called preemptive wars of this kind.
Well, it's hard to argue with any of the facts that he just mentioned there. It remains to be seen what's going to happen with it. Before we let you go today, though, Doug, I do want to end. Gary has something, an angle of all this that I really hadn't thought of before. And Gary, take it away.
No, it's not much of an angle. Doug, I have a special presentation for you, actually. I think there's many of our viewers were so frustrated that you didn't run for president. And then I know. Look, and I love that. Listen, that's what everybody loves about you. You're a humble man, and we appreciate that. We recognize that. But I think even more people now are frustrated that you're not in the administration. So I took it upon myself, and I think, I hope you don't mind, that I wanted to get an unofficial portrait done of you. So here it is. I want to present your unofficial portrait. And what now is, the good news is, the better news, I should say, is that there's a grassroots effort now, and I'm heading it up, by the way, to get this hung in the Oval Office. Because if Donald Trump won't listen to you, he'll have to look you in the eye every time when he sees this portrait and recognize, boy, there is somebody out there that is trying to tell me the right things, but I'm going to do something else. So, Doug, this is your unofficial portrait. I just wanted to present it to you.
Well, thank you, I guess.
And listen, I think it would be only fair. I did one for Danny also, so this is Danny's.
Oh Lord.
Well, I think it's better than the puppet regime, and it's better than the baby Trump presentations on YouTube. But
I'll tell you where this comes from, Doug, is actually, and I've said this to you before, is that you are probably one of the most pirated personalities on YouTube. And the reason why I even came across this is that one of our viewers had sent videos of you and Danny being translated to Russian. And those were from the thumbnails that they make when they translate you into Russian. So that's where those photographs come from.
Well, Liz Cheney always says that anybody who disagrees with her is a Putin agent. What can we say?
So,
well, listen, Doug, we sure appreciate you coming on, and I hope that somehow that does get into the White House. It would be great to have you looming over the president so he can think, wow, he's been right on all these things. Maybe I should listen this time. We'll have to wait and see. But in any case, thank you for coming on today and give us this clarity. And we just hope that somehow sanity can prevail before bombs start falling.
All right. Well, we'll all hope together. Thank you.
We will. And thank you very much for joining us today. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't on your way out. We really appreciate you guys. We are on podcast. I want to make sure everybody's aware of this because I know we got a lot of new viewers here. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcast Addict. Type in Daniel Davis Deep Dive and you'll find us there. And we will continue to keep you appraised of everything that's going on. And if anything breaks later in the rest of the day, tune back in because we'll have that for you. Thank you very much. And we'll see you later on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.